I checked my phone and saw it was 3:02 a.m. The screen lit up my face in the dark, and for 1 second, everything felt completely normal. Then the fridge stopped humming and the AC cut out. The house just went quiet in a way that didn't feel like quiet, and it felt like something was pressing down on the air. There was no sound at all, except for the neon green numbers on the clock flipping to 3:03, and then the whistling started outside. Lock your doors and stay tuned, because you need to understand how this works. We live in the luckiest neighborhood on earth, where nobody gets sick, nobody loses their job, and nobody ever goes broke. The luck is real, but it costs exactly one thing. Every single night at 3:03 a.m., you do not look out the window. That is the only rule we have to follow. I used to think it was easy. The blessings and the canvas locks. The luck isn't subtle at all. I'm not talking about finding a good parking spot or catching a green light. Our neighbor, Mr. OCI, got a certified letter in the mail 8 months after moving in. And it turned out a great uncle he'd never met died and left him land in Acro worth more than his house. Diane lived across the street and been passed over for a promotion 4 years running, but she suddenly got the VP title and a relocation package to a city she always wanted to live in. She actually cried in her driveway when she got the call. My dad had a wrecked back since before I was born, but the pain just stopped one morning about 2 weeks after we moved in. He stood in the kitchen and kept bending side to side while looking genuinely confused. But none of that is why we stayed. We stayed because of Leo. My little brother was born with a severe lung condition where you do not name things yet because the doctors are careful about hope. He spent the first 14 months of his life in a hospital room with machines doing the breathing for him. My parents drove to that hospital every single day when I was 7. And I still remember the smell of the parking garage and those paper bracelets. The day we moved into this neighborhood, Leo was still on supplemental oxygen. By the end of the first week, his oxygen levels were normal, and his doctors ran 3 separate panels because she did not believe the first 2. His lungs were just clear with no scarring or restriction. She used the word inexplicable twice in the same sentence, and then stopped talking for a moment. Leo's 10 now and runs around the backyard or argues with me about video games. He sleeps without any machines, so we follow the rule. Dad installed heavy canvas shutters on every window in the house that are military grade and roll down from a bracket at the top. They lock at the bottom with a heavy-duty smart padlock that you control from your phone. Every night, exactly 2:55 a.m., he goes room to room and locks them all down. He doesn't say much while he's doing it, but he moves fast and he checks each lock twice. Mom sometimes sits on the red couch in the living room after he's done and just stays there in the dark with her hands in her lap. She does not touch the blinds or speak. She just waits for 3:05 to come, and when it finally does, her shoulders drop about 2 inches. We never talked about it out loud because it was just the shape of how we lived. We accepted the canvas and the silence and the locks because the luck was real and Leo could breathe. But we did not understand what we had actually agreed to until the week we moved in. That was when the neighbors showed up at our door with a fruit basket, a tablet, and a look on their faces like they were delivering a diagnosis. The committee and the 3:03 melody. There were 6 of them in total. They showed up on a Tuesday afternoon just 3 days after the moving truck had pulled away, and they stood on our front porch in a loose circle. They were holding a wicker basket filled with fruit that had no business being ripe in late November. There were mangoes, soft figs, and a cluster of cherries so dark they looked almost black. One of them was a tall woman with silver-streaked locks and a name tag that said Dorinda, and she held a locked tablet against her chest like it was a shield. Every single one of them was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of look that made you feel welcome. It was that tight, focused expression you make when you're trying really hard to concentrate on a difficult task. Once they came inside and sat at our kitchen table, they introduced themselves as the welcoming committee. That sounds harmless enough, but the thing is, none of them actually looked at my parents while they spoke. Their eyes were locked on Leo. He was sitting in his little chair at the end of the table, still hooked up to his oxygen tank back then, and the committee watched him the entire time, like he was the only reason they'd bothered to show up. Looking back, I'm pretty sure he was the reason. Dorinda handled most of the talking and started by explaining the luck of the neighborhood. She went through it methodically, almost like she was checking items off a grocery list. She talked about the health, the money, and the sudden career breaks everyone seemed to get. According to her, the neighborhood had kept a perfect record for 31 years without a single foreclosure, medical diagnosis, or accident. She said all this plainly, without any drama or excitement, and that's what made it so creepy, because it didn't feel like she was selling us a dream. She was just stating a fact. Then she moved on to the whistling. It starts at 3:03 a.m. and ends at 3:05 a.m. every single night, without exception. The sound begins at the tree line at the far edge of the street, and you can hear it starting out faint, right at the very edge of what your ears can pick up, before it starts getting closer. It moves. It passes the front of every house on the block at a slow crawl, and then it's just gone. But the rule is very simple. You do not look. My dad asked what happens if someone decides to look. And while his voice stayed steady, I noticed he'd gone completely still. Dorinda didn't answer with words. She just unlocked the tablet and slid it across the table face up so my parents could see the screen. I was standing in the hallway, so I didn't see the footage myself, but I heard my mom make a sound I have never heard her make before or since. My dad pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped the floor, and he just said, "Okay," in a quiet, collapsed voice that sounded like all the air had left his lungs. Dorinda took the tablet back and locked it immediately. She told him that the people in that video had looked, and because of that, their luck had reversed. It doesn't happen slowly over time, but instead it hits all at once, like a light switch being flipped. And from that moment on, their lives just pulled toward catastrophe the way a drain pulls water. She called it losing the light. After the committee left, my dad drove straight to the hardware store and came back with rolls of heavy canvas, metal brackets, and a set of smart locks. He didn't explain what he was doing or why he was doing it. He spent the rest of the evening installing them over every single window in the house. I should tell you what the melody actually sounds like, because the details matter. It is a sequence of 3 notes that are sharp, high, and evenly spaced, sounding like the opening phrase of a lullaby that got stuck on repeat. The tune never changes, never speeds up or slows down as it passes. It just keeps cycling those same 3 notes while the cold seeps in under the doors and the smart bulbs in the hallway start to flicker. Your phone screen will go dark even if the brightness is turned all the way up, and the Nest thermostat usually reboots itself from scratch. For 5 years, those canvas shutters stayed down and our luck stayed perfect. Leo grew strong and healthy, and we almost forgot what it was like to be afraid. Then Marcus came over for a sleepover. The sleepover and the breach. Marcus had been my best friend since 4th grade, and his entire personality was built on the idea that he could explain away anything. Every ghost story, every weird coincidence, or every detail that didn't quite add up was met with a rational breakdown before you could even finish your sentence. When his parents went out of town for the weekend and he showed up on Friday night with his backpack and a laptop, I wasn't worried about the whistling itself. I was just worried about the questions he was going to ask. He noticed the canvas shutters within 30 seconds of walking through the front door. "What are those for?" he asked, already walking toward the living room window with his fingers reaching for the bottom edge of the lock. I stepped in front of him to block his path and and told him to just leave him alone. He looked at me, then at the heavy smart padlock, then back at me with that little calculation happening behind his eyes. I tried to change the subject by pulling him toward the couch to play games, and for a while, he actually let it go. The night seemed normal at first as we ordered food and argued about nothing important. Leo fell asleep between us on the couch around 11 p.m. with a controller still gripped in his hand, so we carried him back to his room. By 2 a.m., we were still awake, half watching some movie, and Marcus had gone quiet in that specific way that told me he was overthinking something. Around 2:40 a.m., the ambient hum of the house started to soften and fade away. The hum of the refrigerator and the subtle white noise of the vents just stopped. It happens gradually enough that you don't really notice it until the sound's totally gone. And then the silence lands on you all at once like a heavy blanket. Marcus definitely noticed the change. "This neighborhood has a psycho, doesn't it?" he said, not even bothering to look at me. "I heard some kids at school saying someone walks street to street at night, and I bet that's why you have the blackout curtains." I sat up straight and told him it wasn't that, and I told him to just drop it. I snapped, getting up to check on Leo in the other room. He was asleep on his back, looking small and quiet, and I stood there in a doorway a second longer than I really needed to, just to breathe. When I came back to the living room, Marcus had his phone out. He wasn't scrolling through social media, though. He had an app open that I didn't recognize, with a gray interface and a signal waveform moving across the middle, and he was pointing the device directly toward the window. "I cloned the RFID signal from the lock earlier tonight when you went to the bathroom," he said, and his voice had that calm, pleased tone he always got when he solved a puzzle. "It only takes about 4 seconds to do." My stomach dropped completely as I realized what he'd done. The clock on the microwave in the kitchen read 3:03. Then the whistling started. It came in exactly the way it always does, with those 3 faint notes drifting in from the direction of the tree line. It sounded cheerful and almost pretty if you didn't know what it meant. The sound moves at the pace of a slow walk, and you can actually track it crossing from house to house if you're paying close enough attention. I'd spent 5 years learning how to ignore it, but Marcus was different. Marcus stood and walked toward the window like it was the most natural thing in the world. I moved faster than I ever have in my life. I ran straight into Leo's room, grabbed him out of his bed, and pressed his face hard into my shoulder. He woke up confused and started to complain, but I put my hand over his eyes and turned us both toward the back wall so we couldn't see anything. Behind me, I heard the app on the phone give a short chirp. The digital lock on the window clicked green. The heavy canvas blind snapped up with a loud crack like a flag catching a sudden gust of wind. The whistling stopped right in the middle of a note. It was a clean cut, like someone had suddenly placed a hand over a speaker, and the silence that followed was a completely different kind of silence than the one we had before. The graphic corruption and the mimic. I kept my eyes shut tight. Leo was still pressed against my shoulder, half asleep and confused, with one small hand gripping the back of my shirt like a lifeline. I reached out sideways with my free arm and let my fingers drag along the wall until I felt the glass. It was so cold it actually burned. The kind of deep chill that has nothing to do with the weather. I found a canvas pull cord below the frame and yanked it down as hard as I could. The blind snapped back into place, and I heard the lock engage with a small, hollow click. Then I finally opened my eyes and looked at Marcus. It'd been maybe 15 seconds since that blind went up, but everything had changed. His eyes were completely red. I don't mean they were bloodshot, I mean they were solid red. His skin had turned the color of wet ash and looked loose, almost like it didn't fit his face anymore. Black veins were spreading up his throat and branching under his jaw toward his cheekbones. A thin line of blood ran from his left nostril down over his lip, but he didn't even move to wipe it away. He didn't blink once. He just stood there at the window with his arms at his side, staring at the canvas blind, and he looked like a photograph of himself taken 40 years into the future. He looked ancient, and he looked completely ruined. I was still holding Leo when Dad came through the doorway and stopped dead. He looked at Marcus, and the expression on his face wasn't exactly fear. It was something much worse. It was recognition. He had seen that footage on Dorinda's tablet 5 years ago, and now he was watching the same thing happen in his own living room. There was nothing useful left in his expression at all. Then every smart speaker in the house turned on at the exact same time. The Alexa in the kitchen started up, then the one in the hallway, and both of our phones on the coffee table lit up and started playing audio. Through all of them, in perfect sync, came my mom's voice. It was her exact voice, with that specific warmth she has and the way she clips the end of her words. Open the door. Let me look at him. Let me look. The thing is, Mom was upstairs asleep. I could hear her moving around up there because the noise had woken her up. Dad lunged for the router and yanked the cord straight out of the wall. The speakers went dead immediately, but the phones kept going for another 3 seconds on their own. Her voice just kept repeating that same phrase until they finally cut out. We moved to the center of the living room, all 4 of us, and we sat on the floor and waited for the sun. Marcus never said a word. He just sat there with his knees up and those ruined eyes wide open. And every few minutes, a slow tear of blood would track down his face and fall to the floor. Sunrise finally came at 6:21 a.m., and the cold left the room with the light. Marcus's parents drove up at 8 a.m. sharp. His mom got out of the car and saw his face through the screen door, but she didn't say a single word to any of us. She just went back to the car, grabbed a bag, and they left. They never came back, and his house went on the market just 11 days later. Our luck stayed perfect, or at least that's what we told ourselves. We told ourselves it was finally over. We still live in this house. Leo runs and laughs and breathes on his own, and those canvas shutters lock every night at 2:55 a.m. But this morning, I found a new audio file in my phone's voice memos that was recorded at 3:03 a.m. It's that same 3-note melody, and the sound is clean, very close. The problem is, it wasn't recorded outside my window. The recording came from inside my closet. Subscribe if you want to see what happens next.